Imagine sleeping in your car for weeks with only a cooler in the back seat serving as your refrigerator. Imagine showering in gas station bathrooms, living day by day on bologna sandwiches, and not knowing if tomorrow will bring food or opportunity. Now imagine that same person becoming a world-famous comedian, talk show host, best-selling author, and a millionaire worth over $200 million. This isn't a Hollywood script. This is the real story of Steve Harvey. From the pain of homelessness to the glory of success, this is how one man transformed his life through faith, persistence, and pure determination. Before we dive into this inspiring journey, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Because today we're about to uncover one of the most incredible success stories of our time. Steve Harvey was born on January 17, 1957, in Welch, West Virginia. His parents, Jesse and Eloise Harvey, were hardworking but lived a modest life. Jesse worked as a coal miner, a tough and dangerous job, while Eloise took care of the home. The family didn't have much money, but they had strong values: faith, hard work, and perseverance. When Steve was still a child, his family moved to Cleveland, Ohio in search of better opportunities. But things weren't easy. Steve struggled with a severe stutter that made speaking in class extremely difficult. Kids laughed at him and even teachers doubted him. One day, a teacher gave the class an assignment: write down what you want to be when you grow up. While others wrote things like doctor, teacher, or lawyer, Steve boldly wrote, "I want to be on television." His teacher ridiculed him, saying, "Who do you know on TV? Name one person like you who's ever been on television." He even called his parents and told them he was being unrealistic. But instead of killing his dream, that moment planted a seed of determination. Deep down, Steve knew he was meant for more. That childhood dream of appearing on TV became his guiding light, even when the world around him said it was impossible. After finishing high school, Steve tried his hand at many jobs. He worked as a carpet cleaner, a mailman, insurance salesman, even a boxer. He bounced from one gig to another, searching for something that truly fit. But nothing felt right. During this time, he also got married and started a family, which added more responsibility and financial pressure. Bills piled up and life seemed to get heavier each day. But Steve had a gift: his natural sense of humor and his ability to make people laugh. Friends encouraged him to try comedy, but it was a risky move. In 1985, Steve finally gave it a shot. He performed stand-up comedy for the first time at a small club. The response was positive, and for the first time in his life, Steve felt like he had found his calling. The laughter of strangers gave him hope. But hope doesn't pay bills. Pursuing comedy meant quitting stable jobs and stepping into uncertainty. Soon, the financial strain became unbearable. The decision to chase comedy eventually led Steve Harvey into homelessness. For 3 long years in the late 1980s, he lived out of his 1976 Ford Tempo. He had no money, nowhere to turn. He would wash up in gas station bathrooms, sleep in his car, and survive on whatever cheap food he could find. He recalls keeping an igloo cooler in the back seat filled with sandwiches and drinks. Sometimes he didn't have enough to eat. Sometimes he cried himself to sleep, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Steve often questioned God during this time. He prayed every night, asking, "Why me? Why this pain? Why this struggle?" But despite the hardship, he refused to give up. Somewhere deep inside, he believed his breakthrough was coming. There were moments when he thought about quitting comedy altogether. But every time he stepped on stage, every time he heard laughter, he was reminded of his purpose. That kept him going, even through the darkest nights. Steve Harvey's turning point came when he entered a comedy competition. Though he was broke, he gave it everything he had. And for the first time, people in the industry began to notice his talent. Soon after, he landed gigs performing at comedy clubs across the country. He still wasn't rich, but he was no longer invisible. One of his biggest early breaks came when he appeared on Showtime at the Apollo. Hosting the legendary show gave him national exposure and opened the door to bigger opportunities. In the 1990s, Steve became one of the kings of comedy alongside Cedric the Entertainer, Tainer, D.L. Hewley, and Bernie Mac. Their comedy tour was so successful, it grossed millions of dollars and was later turned into a hit film directed by Spike Lee. From sleeping in a car to selling out stadiums, that was the power of persistence. But Steve didn't stop at stand-up comedies. He knew that true success meant diversifying his career. He starred in his own sitcom, The Steve Harvey Show, which ran from 1996 to 2002 and became a major hit. He also wrote best-selling books, including Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, which was later adapted into a blockbuster movie. The book made him a respected voice on relationships and life advice. Steve also became a popular radio personality with the Steve Harvey Morning Show, reaching millions of listeners every day. Then came the role that made him a household name worldwide, hosting Family Feud. His humor, quick wit, and unforgettable reactions turned the show into a massive success. Steve Harvey became more than a comedian. He became a cultural icon. By this time, Steve Harvey was not just surviving, he was thriving. From a homeless man living in his car, he had become a millionaire with multiple income streams. One thing Steve Harvey always emphasizes is faith. He believes it was God who guided him through the darkest times and lifted him to where he is today. He often shares motivational messages, encouraging others never to give up, no matter how impossible life seems. Steve also talks about the importance of vision. He tells the story of how, as a young boy, he wrote down that dream of being on TV. Even when others laughed at him, he kept that dream alive. And years later, it came true. Another key lesson he teaches is persistence. He once said, if you're going through hell, keep going. For Steve, homelessness wasn't the end, it was just a chapter in his story. Today, Steve Harvey is worth over $200 million. He owns mansions, cars, and businesses. He hosts international shows, inspires millions through his motivational speeches, and gives back through his philanthropic efforts. But Steve never forgets where he came from. He often reminds people that he was once the man sleeping in his car, crying himself to sleep, wondering if he would ever make it. That's what makes his story so powerful. He didn't inherit wealth. He didn't get lucky. He fought, struggled, and refused to quit. Steve Harvey's journey teaches us several important lessons. Dream big, even when others laugh. As a child, Steve dreamed of being on TV. People laughed, but he held on to that vision until it came true. Embrace the struggle. Homelessness was painful, but it shaped him. It made him stronger, more resilient, and more grateful for success. Faith has fueled Steve's belief, and God gave him strength to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Diversify your talents. Comedy opened the door, but Steve expanded into books, TV shows, movies, and radio. That's how he built wealth. Never stopped learning. Steve constantly reinvented himself, adapting to new opportunities and audiences. Steve Harvey's story is proof that no matter how low life takes you, it doesn't define you. Homelessness didn't define him. Poverty didn't define him. Stuttering didn't define him. What defined him was his courage to keep going, his faith to believe in better days, and his refusal to quit. If Steve Harvey could go from sleeping in his car to building a multi-million-dollar empire, then what excuse do we have? So, whenever you feel like giving up, remember Steve Harvey's story. Remember that the darkest nights often lead to the brightest morning. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the real story of how Steve Harvey went from homeless to millionaire. A journey of faith, resilience, and the power of never giving up. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Because you never know, this story might just change someone's life.